So it's going to be a little hard for me to jump into this. So one of the things that we've seen with this current pandemic is the explosion in interest in plants. I first noticed this myself when I was going for my typical spring seed buy for my gardens, when almost everything I typically would buy was out of stock and they didn't know when they were going to get in. And this kind of trend picked up all over the place. People were buying indoor house plants and gardening was just getting crazy. And there's a reason for this, because when we're home, we start to see what's around us. And people tend to have an innate kind of interaction with plants that they love. And this is what this class is going to really get at. Kind of what is a plant and why do they mean so much to us? So before we really dive into what actually a plant is, I want you to take a few minutes. You can pause the video, but I want you to write down 5 characteristics you think define a plant. Ask yourself what a plant is and what it does. Okay, so I hope that you took the time to do that. But when we talk about plants as biologists, we're talking about a very specific set of organisms with very specific properties. Properties that you might not even have known about. When we talk about the plant kingdom, what we're referring to are members of the kingdom Plantae, or sometimes called the Virida Plantae, the green plants. And this is a large, diverse group of over 320,000 described species. They're globally distributed. They're in every continent, including Antarctica. They have totally different, diverse life forms. They occupy everywhere from arid deserts all the way to being truly aquatic plants. They have an extremely long fossil record. In fact, the fossil record of life on Earth is pretty much defined by the plants that we find in these strata. And of course, their value for human society and our global ecosystems can't be understated, because they provide all of the food and shelter for every organism that is on our planet. But in particular, when we talk about the kingdom Plantae, we're really talking about organisms that have very specific qualities. And there's a number of uniting traits that define what a plant is. One of the major ways that we define plants is that these are organisms that have cell walls that are made of cellulose. So if you think back to intro biology and how plant cells are structured, you can see that they have, along their plasma bilayer, their membrane, they have a cell wall structure. And this is composed of these complex organic molecules that they build up in chains. Another really important trait, one that you might have written down, is that they can photosynthesize. But a lot of different organisms can photosynthesize beyond just plants. But what makes plants unique is how they photosynthesize. Photosynthesis is run by having various pigments in them, and plants have chlorophylls A and B. And particularly chlorophyll B is a unique pigment to the kingdom Plantae. And it's a very complex structure that's designed to harness the power of the sun and grab photons to run the photosynthetic process. This is why we call plants green plants, because the chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B try to absorb light spectra from the red and the blue lanes. And they're generally going to reflect green, which gives them that whole green appearance. Another trait that is really important to define the plant kingdom is that plants are going to store the sugars they make through photosynthesis or gather through some other means as starch. So those carbohydrates are loaded into very particular structures, and these are stored within the cells in these large structures that we call plastids. And some of the other traits that make plants unique but aren't necessarily exclusive to the plant kingdom are, in fact, these plastids, these double membrane organelles that we find. These plastids are made up of things such as chloroplasts, but other very specialized different plastids that we'll get into more in this course. Most plants also photosynthesize, besides a couple very notable exceptions that are parasites of other organisms. But photosynthesis is something that even the most primitive plant species have. And also unique to the plant kingdom is that they're going to have 3 genomes. They have that nuclear genome, which is you and I also have, as well as mitochondria genome. But they have a 3rd one through the chloroplast, which also have their own set of DNA. A lot of times, though, that this narrow definition of plants kind of gets lost in pop culture. And we see a lot of other organisms that are considered plants, but they're actually very different from plants. Historically, botanists have gone into all these other groups as well. For instance, the fungus, which is a very popular group right now, they are not plants. They're actually more closely related to you and I. They have no plastids in them, so they don't have chlorophyll or anything like that. And again, they're actually really animal relatives, and they share many similarities with you and I. Lichens are kind of an interesting in-between world. Lichens are a symbiosis between fungus and a photosynthetic partner. Sometimes that photosynthetic partner could be a green algae, which are true plants. But other times they might be something like a cyanobacteria, which are not a true plant, but they're photosynthesizing bacteria. Closer to true plants, we have the red algae, which are the sister taxa to the true plants. They share many similarities with real plants, except they don't have chlorophyll B, and again, they're that kind of outgroup to our plant kingdom. Also, brown algae and kelp, very similar, have similar life histories as plants, but again, they're not true plants, mainly because they don't possess that chlorophyll B that we see in those true plants. And then lastly, the cyanobacteria, which are prokaryotes and not eukaryote, are a really interesting class of organisms that probably exist within plants, as they are probably what got absorbed by that early eukaryote and became the chloroplast evolution over evolutionary time. So to review this lecture real fast, plants refer to a large and diverse kingdom of organisms that have very specific qualities that define that group of organisms. And many of these organisms that we consider plants are actually not plants and have various different relationships to plants and ourselves. And then one of the big take-homes you should think about is, can you define a plant and describe why something is or is not a plant?